What crazy ass story do you need to tell? Years ago, I was hitchhiking north of Richmond, Virginia, when a car with two dudes picked me up. We got to chatting, and it turns out they were headed to their friend's place to shoot guns, and asked me if I wanted to join. I asked if his friend would be okay with a random homeless-esque fellow shooting his guns, and he said, "Hell, just pretend to be my cousin from Seattle." So instead of sitting on the highway in 100-degree weather, I spent an afternoon eating hamburgers, shooting guns, and blowing shit up with bags of tannerite on some random employee's woodland property. Don't remember your name, dude, but you were the man. Thanks for a great memory. When I was learning to fly at a sketchy flight school, I was doing a pre-flight check flight close to the end of the program. I was doing the run-up in a Cessna when I smelled something. "Do you smell that? Smells like gas," I say. Instructor, 21 years old, shrugs, annoyed. I open the door, and there is a spreading puddle of avgas under the plane. "Shit," the instructor panics. "Stay in the plane. I'll get help," and runs off. As soon as I got the engine off, I noped out of there and watched the plane dump all its fuel on the runway. They kindly gave me another plane and instructor. They fixed their plane, and a month later, I read about the same plane crashing due to fuel issues. One fatality, no significant repercussions for company. A little while back, my roommate was contacted by a wealthy man in the area who wanted to pay her to be his live-in pet for an entire month. He thought that this was a cutesy way of saying that it was a sugar daddy baby arrangement. Turns out, what he actually meant was that she would be given room, board, and a very healthy allowance to spend a large portion of her day dressed as a cat, walking on her hands and knees, eating out of a bowl, using a litter box, and, yes, sleeping in a little cage at night. Sex wasn't even on the table. He was only interested in having a human cat for a month. She seriously considered the offer for a weekend, and then politely declined. Edit. This allowance would have covered her college tuition for the semester. He knew what he wanted and was very motivated. My dad went to secondary school with John Lennon and was a couple years older than him. Dad was known for playing the drums and being quite musical, and one day John asks him whether he'd like to be the drummer in a band he's forming. Dad was keen, but my granny said he needed to prioritize studying, and so he didn't join. The band formed and were called the Quarrymen, and I think a guy called Colin was the drummer instead of Dad, who I believe was later replaced by Pete Best and then Ringo, as they changed to the Silver Beatles and then the Beatles. I like to imagine that in an alternative universe, my dad said yes, and that was history. I don't even mind that I wouldn't have been born if this had been the outcome. He really deserved to have had that lifetime. Edit. Well, this got a lot more attention than I ever could have expected. I only joined Reddit a little while ago. Thank you to the 4 kind strangers who gave me a silver medal. I feel very honored. It's blowing my little mind that over 20k people have read this. It's been awesome to hear everyone else's near misses and chances of fate, and cheers for the many lovely comments about my story. Have a great day, chaps. Nothing super amazing, but I, 26, am adopted. I have nothing to do with my biological family, save for a half-brother who I reconnected with last year. We're friends on Facebook. About a year and a half ago, I spent 6 months as a pizza delivery driver. While there I met a man, probably in his 50s or so. We got along. He was a driver, just for something to do. Since he's retired now, I quit the job 6 months in, but a couple months ago I came back and the guy is still there. A week ago, my brother tags me on Facebook, as well as my co-worker. A few days later I ask my co-worker how he knows my brother. After a misunderstanding, my brother has the same name as his father. So when I asked, he thought I was talking about my brother's father. We found out that the co-worker is actually my uncle by marriage, or was. He was married to my bio mom's sister for some 20 years, until their divorce a couple years ago. The guy used to babysit me when I was a baby, and has pictures of my brother and bio mom that he gave me. He's currently looking for baby pictures of me, because I don't have any from before I was adopted. My mom and dad would be super happy if he can find them. Edit. Went to bed an hour after posting and only like 8 upvotes. Row, edit 2. I also just remembered, I actually met the caseworker who handed me over a few years ago, too. She was at my dad's work party. She remembered me and my brother and everything. Don't know how interesting it is, but a few years ago, I'd go to college in the morning and leave at like midnight because I didn't have a PC and needed to work on homework at school. One time on the last train ride home, I had to catch 2 trains and 2 buses each way to get there and back. We were coming into the last station where I'd get off. There was this Asian guy acting a bit strange the whole ride. He gets up and stands in the middle of the car, and as the train brakes, coming into the station, he falls flat on his face from a full standing position, lays there until the train stops, stands up, dusts himself off, and walks out of the open doors like nothing happened. I saw this guy doing it like 5 other separate times, and since I was used to it at that point, I enjoyed looking out for the uninitiated riders' reactions. Plenty more slightly weird stuff happened on my late night subway rides home. I really enjoyed the entertainment. I stole my own car back once. I used to restore classic cars. I had the most valuable one I've ever had at a body shop, and he took forever to finish it. He had painted other cars for me, but apparently developed a drug problem. I would check on the car every week to see if there was any progress. Finally, after a year, he told me he painted 90% of it, but he's asking for more money than we originally agreed. I drive there on a Friday afternoon unannounced and see my car outside the shop, worth a ton of money, with the shop owner nowhere in sight. His neighbor told me he had left the car outside for 3 days, and several people have tried to steal it. So I call a tow truck and tow it to my garage. Right away, on my home, the shop owner calls me over and over again. He thought somebody stole the car. He kept calling me for months. I never responded. I was an exchange student in Poland a few years ago. I was freshly 18 and had almost no experience with alcohol. 3rd week of school, we had a dance and I decided to attend. It was not at all like the school dances we have in the US. First off, it was held at a club downtown. Little odd, but okay. Second, it had a bar. I was in the senior class in high school, and we were all 18, so we could drink. I was not ready for that at all. Third, I had just started smoking the week before. My high school had a smoking gazebo, and probably 1/3 of my class smoked. I started smoking to make friends. Lol. This turned into the perfect storm of me getting absolutely effing shit-faced. After blacking out shortly, I was suddenly outside smoking, and my friends and I were walking to a nearby 24H liquor store. I walked in, visibly inebriated, and bought a mid-sized bottle of vodka. The cashier was hesitant, but when she heard I was American, basically just said, "F it, go ham." Probably another 2 hours, and another blackout later, the police arrive. They start yelling at my class president for wandering in the road. For some reason, drunk me decides I should get involved, even though I barely speak Polish, and I'm super effing wasted. I walk up to the cop, and in the worst Polish I've ever spoken, tried to say, "Leave him alone," but what came out was, "Leave," and then a pile of vomit all over his boots. OF. This is it, I thought. I'm going to get arrested and deported. The cop looked at me and said, in English, "You an American?" "Yes, sir," I replied, knowing I was in deep shit. The cop looked me up and down, looked at the bottle of vodka in my hand and said, "You drink shit vodka. Come with me." I was put into the back of the police car, and he started to drive away. My heart sank. 3 weeks into what was supposed to be the best year of my life, it was already over. But he stopped 2 blocks away at the 24H liquor store, brought me inside, and bought me a 100ml bottle of Zabrałka vodka. He said, "This is good and cheap. Welcome to Poland. Now let me take you back to your friends." As we pulled back up to the club, he leaned back and said, "Watch this." He turned on the lights and siren, and 3 or 4 kids ran down the block. He was laughing uncontrollably. He unlocked the door, and as I climbed out, he shouted, "Be safe, friend." 20 minutes later I blacked out again, and the next thing I remembered was waking up on the kitchen floor of the house I was living in, feeling like absolute shit. My host mother had made coffee and said, "Damn, you had a night, huh?" And that was the craziest night I ever had. I work in a prison as a nurse. Frequently, our inmates insert beads, usually carved from dominoes, under the skin of their penis shaft. It's called beading, and it happens a lot. Pretty much every unit has a D doctor, another inmate, who is particularly skilled in flaying open D and sticking beads inside of them. Or, some inmates say, "F it," and try to do it themselves. We had an inmate who cut himself shaving. Yeah, okay, who had to come up to the medical department because his genitalia was bleeding. Obviously everyone's first thought is, the dude was either trying to put in a bead or take one out and failed. So dude gets up to us and he's holding a towel down his pants against his crotch and everything is soaked in blood. Underwear, towel, pants, you got it, drenched. So I take him into an exam room and get his clothes off. And the dude goes, "It's mostly okay. I stitched it back up myself with my sewing kit." What? Yeah. He stitched his own cock up with a effing sewing kit from commissary. Not only that, but he tied a string around his shaft as a makeshift tourniquet. I go, "Hey, you might want to take that string off of your D before it loses circulation and falls off." Anyway, we get the tourniquet off, and I take out his shitty stitches, and he starts spurting blood from his D, like an active volcano. I've never seen so much blood come from a human being before. We had to burn his cock shut with silver nitrate. It was awesome. I love D-bead stories. When I was 22, I had an internship for the Buffalo Wild Wings marketing department. I was also running a lot at this time. Every time I would go and leave for a run, I would text my GF that I'm leaving for a run, just so someone knows where I am. I get a text from her, mid-run, asking for a special picture when I get back. I agree. Then I get a text from my female boss, making sure I sent out some paperwork, which I did. I get home and I don't even want to take this stupid effing picture. I just want to shower. But I get butt-ass naked and take a bathroom mirror selfie from head to kneecap and send it with a kiss face emoji. An hour later I get a text from my GF that says, "Did you forget my special picture?" And I'm thinking, no WTF, I sent that. So I go into my texts and, oh no, OF, of F me into oblivion. No, I sent the nude to my boss. My heart sank straight into hell. I immediately try to do damage control and say it was not meant for her and that I'm so sorry. I even screenshotted the convo from my GF to show it was a mistake. No response. Went into the office the next day and was called into HR, where I was fired. Shit effing sucked. I had a great gig going. Makes for a great story though. Edit. Didn't expect this to blow up, but I see people arguing about whether or not she should have fired me. I don't blame her for it, mainly because of the 1 hour span between the text and my apology. By the time I responded it made it seem like I was saying it was an accident because I didn't get a positive response. But I have some contacts that are friends with her, and I guess she felt terrible afterwards. She cried after I was fired. She thought the pic was for her at first, so told HR, but only saw my follow-up texts after it was too late. I just wish she would have known I'm not that kind of person and would have asked if that was a mistake. I was always extremely professional around her. So, for me to go from professional to sending a full body nude with a kissy face would not only be ballsy as F, but also put my job on the line. I would think she would realize that's not who I am. But it's over. No hard feelings. This happened in either the late 90s or early 2000s. So my granddad got jiggly with another woman when he was on holiday once with a lady from Kiribati. Anyway, it produced a child, my aunt. Now several years ago, my family decided that we would go and visit her in Kiribati. For those that don't know, it's on the equator. To get there, we had to fly from Fiji on a tiny 50-seater twin prop plane with one toilet at the front. Now, being a kid with a lot of food allergies, I had eaten something that didn't quite sit right. Mild case of food poisoning, if you will. About half an hour into our flight, my stomach gives me that feeling where you know you won't stop what's coming. So I got up and went to the toilet Halfway up the aisle, all hell broke loose. I farted, which wasn't a fart. It was the beginnings of full-blown diarrhea. By the time I got into the toilet and locked the door, my undies were soaked. It was still flowing. I couldn't stop it. Now I was a good kid, so I didn't want to block the toilet. So I threw my undies in the rubbish and unloaded into the toilet. However, the amount that came out, plus the amount of paper I had to use, ended up blocking the toilet anyway, and it stunk really badly. I would have been in there for a good 15 minutes. Meanwhile, the entire plane started stinking of shit. I finished up and cleaned up best I could, but the toilet was done for. It was starting to overflow. I just slowly went back to my seat, with the entire plane staring at me. Disclaimer: back in the day, there was a small amount of water with chemicals to flush with, much more than there is today. A blocked opening means there's nowhere for the poo to go, and no vacuum to suck the shit down, because it's blocked. The more you press the lever, the more chemicals, been saying water as it was faster to type, get pumped in. With the toilet blocked, there's nowhere for it to go except overflow. Now imagine the amount of paper I had to use to block an airplane toilet, and that's why it was blocked. I had to tell my dad what I had done, and he spoke to the flight attendants, who had to try clear the mess of a toilet, with the water starting to splash onto the floor. It was horrible. We finally got to Kiribati, and the plane had to be grounded, while they disinfected and cleaned the whole plane, as it started to sweat. As soon as the heat from outside came in, the plane was delayed for a good while. I only remember this as my dad brought it up the other day, in convo. He thought I put my undies in the toilet, which blocked it. I had to assure him it was all TP and shit. TLDR. Shit myself on a plane and made it get delayed. When I was about 10, my family moved from the city to this small, like a few hundred residents, town in northern Australia. We started going to school, and after a few weeks, we made friends with the other kids. They kept telling us about this club in town called the Nature Rangers. The way they described it, it sounded like some off-brand Boy Scouts, with camping and hiking and all that. They also said they gathered at their ranger hall on Fridays to have movie nights with popcorn and hot dogs. Me and my younger sister begged our parents to let us join, so on Friday night we got dropped off at the hall. So we lined to go into the hall, and all the kids are joking and laughing. They opened the doors and we all start walking in, and the whole mood shifted. All the kids immediately shut up. As I walked in, I looked up, and on the walls was all this signs: sinners must burn, the devil is coming for you, Christ is your only savior, stuff like that. The one that stood out was this huge mural of Australia engulfed in flames, with only our northern town spared. It was an eye-opener for us city kids. What happened next got weirder. It was something you see in movies about fanticles in the deep south of America. We sang these weird folk songs, listened to fire and brimstone sermons. We had to give our faith to the Lord Jesus. The one song that stuck out years later went, "He's under my feet, he's under my feet, Satan is under my feet." The song was accompanied with a dance we had to learn. Me and my sister were looking at each other like, when is this going to be over? Then after all of that, we were ushered outside. The boys and girls were separated. The girls were to stay at the hall, but the boys were off to go with this creepy looking old guy, who they called Brother Joseph. He was getting all the boys to get into his white van to take them for a drive. That's when I knew that enough was enough. I snuck out of the line and silently got my sister and said, "We are going." By this time it was late at night, so we snuck off into the dark. Our home was on the other side of town, so we slowly made our way home, creeping from yard to yard. Every time we saw car lights, we hid in trees or bushes. When we got about half a kilometer from home, I told my sister to leg it, and we sprinted the whole way home, burst into our house, and proceeded to tell our parents the whole thing. They always say they had never seen us so scared. It's a story we laugh about at the time, but at the time it was dodgy as if we lived in that town for another 3 months, and the other kids never mentioned nature rangers to us, ever again. My father used to live in Kazakhstan, around 2006. One day, he was with his work friend at a bar, when this tall, built Russian man comes in. he decides he wants to sit in a bra stool close to my dad, but instead of finding a normal, empty stool, he goes to a chair occupied by a small woman and literally throws her off the chair, exclaiming that he wanted that chair. My dad sees this and immediately attempts to intervene by saying, "Hey man, what the F are you doing?" The Russian man then proceeds to tell my dad, "I'm going to kick the shit out of you when you leave the bar," etc. My father brushes it off, but then he notices that the Russian man's friends have started to join them. About 4 large men inside and another 4 outside. At this point my dad is nervous and decides to call the head of security, HOS, for the company he works for. Keep in mind my dad was the managing director of Kazakhstan at the time. The HOS tells my dad, wait at the bar for him to come, and after some tense drinking with the work buddy, 30-some bodyguards start pouring into the bar, making a line from my dad to the exit of the bar. Because of the country they are in, the bodyguards all have pistols on them as well. So the 30-something bodyguards have made a wall of people either side of my father. After the HOS takes him to his car, but there was an additional 2 black BMWs that were there to escort my dad home. Not the most insane story, but it was insane to hear my dad tell it to me. He also said the urge to flip off the big Russian guys was massive, but he didn't want to risk it. I was traveling in Honduras with a girl I was seeing. We were traveling with her sister and some other people, staying in a hostel. During the 15th of September celebrations, in this little town, there were a whole bunch of festivities going on, so we went out and enjoyed the day. At night, walking back to the hostel, we started to fool around a bit. We were making out in the town plaza. We couldn't go back to the hostel to take it further, since our friends were there, but it was really dark outside, and the town plaza had some columns and areas that were relatively private, so we just decide to have sex there. We start banging in between a couple of the columns, so she is leaning back against a column, and we are kind of on the ground. After a little while, she starts shaking, and I look at her and she has this weird look on her face, and is shaking like crazy. I think, whoa, she is having the craziest orgasm I've ever seen. Then I felt a really strange sensation all through my legs, and I think, whoa, I'm having a really crazy orgasm too. I had this sensation I couldn't really place, but it was familiar. Then I place the sensation, electricity. I realize I'm being electrocuted through my legs. I was wearing a condom, and I look at her and realize she is too. I pull us both to the side. I looked at the column she was leaning against, and there were exposed wires coming out of it. She was kind of crying and freaking out because she thought she was going to die and couldn't move. I'm a pretty avid cyclist, which means whenever I have the time, I will ride my bike away from the city I live in into the mountainous suburbs to challenge myself up some of the local climbs. It was another one of these excursions. I had just rode up and down a big ass mountain on the road headed back to the city center. I was fairly tired, still had 40 kilometers to get back home. All of a sudden, I see traffic on the opposite lane stopped for some reason. What I immediately saw next, I was not prepared for. I saw an ostrich on my lane in front of me, running after the car ahead. WTF. It's not like the country I live in is habitat to any ostriches. Slowly, I follow the ostrich, which is running after the car ahead, faced with a decision. Do I overtake the ostrich? Now I'm no expert on ostriches, but I do remember reading that ostriches run really quickly, and that they can be aggressive towards humans. I don't want to become the victim of an ostrich attack, but I do want to get home quickly, as it was starting to get dark. After hesitating for a while, I gave it all I had, and overtook the ostrich. The rest isn't that interesting. I managed to get home unharmed, but to this day, it remains one of my most surreal experiences, running into an ostrich on a bike ride. I used to open letters for a state-run bureau. We had a dedicated unit of people just opening letters all day long, by the ton. For some reason, a person not in the right mind started to send letters with human feces in them, perhaps as a form of retaliation. I do not know. This went on for weeks, if not months. Certain units had to use disposable gloves and face masks in case of number 2 letters. For my inconvenience, I was one who had the honors to open one of this perpetrator's mail. This time it was different. Along with the poo, something rolled out of the envelope. Something shiny. With the aid of some hand disinfectant and paper towels, I cleaned this tiny, round and golden piece of metal. This poop person sent a gold coin from the 17th-19th century, along with his excrement. The coin is small, around 2 grams, but it appears to be solid gold. I doubt that the person who lost this item is willing to get it back, since sending human feces to a bureau is considered a crime. The coin itself is not worth that much, but this is, by far, the most ridiculous story I have to tell from my previous mind-numbing job as a bureaucrat. And this, kids, is how I got myself a gold coin from a letter full of shit. When I was 19, I would deliver drugs for a friend of mine. One of the guys I delivered weed to worked at the local zoo. One day we decided to smoke up in the somewhat hidden area behind the indoor penguin enclosure. After the search, we went inside to find the penguins acting very weird. Turns out we were smoking right next to the air intake for said penguin enclosure, and that was the day I accidentally hotboxed some penguins. When my mom was pregnant with me, she and my father divorced, and he gave up all parental rights. I've never met him or spoken to him. I've only seen a few pictures. About 2 years ago, I worked at a healthcare facility where I would float to different offices around the county based on who needed the help. This one particular morning, I was checking the doctor's schedule and saw my father's name. He was scheduled to be in the office next door to where I was working, and I thought it was pretty crazy, but I most likely wouldn't even see him. The time of his appointment came, and he walked into my office straight up to me and says he had a doctor's appointment with Dr. X. My heart was racing, cause I knew it was him. As soon as he walked through the door, I told him Dr. X was the office next door, and he left. A little while later, I walked over to the other office to deliver some faxes, and on my way out, he trailed behind me, and I held the door for him. He said thank you, and that was my one and only interaction with my father in my 30 years of living. Edit. Y'all have really made my day with all this karma and silver. Thanks, kind Redditors. 3 to 4 years ago, I was living in this bigger European city, 2 million people, for some years now. I went with a girl to a pub, and since all tables were full, we sat at the bar. There was an older guy sitting next to me, 50ish, white hair, smoking a cigar, who kinda distracted me because he reminded me of my uncle. Now mind, my uncle was living in the US for around 25 years already. He didn't look like that dude, nor did he act too similar. That bug guy just had some gestures that reminded me of him, mixed with the look of another distant relative. So, the girl I was with goes to the toilet, so I can't hold back anymore and look this dude in the eyes and tell him he reminds me of my uncle. He jokingly asks, "What's his name?" I tell him, and also tell him, well, he lives in the US and works in field of work, and then the guy looks stunned and tells me the names of my whole effing family. Turns out, he was the flatmate of my uncle 30 years ago, for about half a year. That was definitely one of the weirdest bar stories I experienced. TLDR. Went to bar in big city. Guy reminds me of my uncle. I tell him. Turns out he was my uncle's flatmate 30 years ago for half a year. Uncle lives on another continent for 25 years now. So me and my brother are fraternal twins. My stepmom passed away due to breast cancer when we were around 15 years old. She was like a second mother to us and had been around since we were very young. 5 years old. Now fast forward to our junior year of college. I attended a school in upstate NY, while he attended a university in the state of Florida. One night, I woke up in sweat, with tears coming down my eyes. I had the most vivid dream. I was in a house and my stepmother was there. I knew she had passed in this dream, which was a first for me. She hugged me, told me how handsome I had become, and that she loved me. I woke up drenched in sweat, thinking, WTF was that? I didn't say anything to anybody and went to class. As I'm walking back to my apartment after class, I get a call from my brother. His first words were, "I know this is going to sound weird, but I had the most vivid dream about Maggie last night. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up." As he went on to describe the same dream I had just experienced the night prior. We've never had a twin moment like this, and I don't really know what to make of it, but it's always been a story that I wanted to tell. This is a long story from the early 1980s that has Kentucky justice in it. My family lived just outside of Cincinnati on the Kentucky side of the Ohio River. My father's older brother lived here as well, and was a father to 4 daughters. One of his daughters at the age of 18 or so was dating a guy who was a little older than her, who convinced her to move down south with him. My uncle approved, and his daughter headed south with her boyfriend into a Kentucky holler that his extended family lived in. Time passed and my uncle hadn't heard from his daughter in a while, and he started to grow concerned. My cousin called my uncle in distress from a payphone at a grocery store, saying she was being mistreated by her boyfriend's family and being held hostage and worked like a slave. Before my uncle could learn more, the phone was cut off. At this point in the story, it's important to know my uncle was an avid hunter and gun collector. He explained to his wife and other daughters the situation. He packed up his Oldsmobile Delta 88 with his favorite guns and headed down to the holler his daughter's boyfriend was from. He was going down in hillbilly country where there were no street names, just dirt roads and family farms. By the time he finally found their farmhouse, it was night. The boyfriend's family was on the porch, shooting shotguns off into the air, fully expecting to scare my uncle away. My uncle stopped his car 50 yards from the house and popped the trunk. He methodically lined up his rifles on the hood of the car, facing the house, tooling up like Arnold in Commando on the beach. My uncle was an extremely large man who was well known for having an explosive temper. Completely unfazed, he shouted up to the hillbillies, "If my daughter doesn't come down in 5 minutes, I'm going to come up there and kill every man, woman, and child I see." The boyfriend and his brothers ran back inside the house, and not even 1 minute later, my cousin came running out of the house with her single suitcase. Same uncle another time was driving on a bridge that spanned some small river. The bridge was old and only had enough room for 1 car to traverse at a time. He came to a standoff with 3 hillbillies in a pickup truck who were honking and yelling at him to back up. My uncle, ever stubborn, refused and instead got out of his car, figuring he'd show them how big he was and they'd change their tune. One of the hillbillies shouted to my uncle, "You don't scare us. There are 3 of us." And my uncle, like a psychopath, shouted back, "Do all 3 of you know how to swim?" To which they relented and backed up their truck to let my uncle pass.